everybody. It is 5 o'clock, and I want to honor your time. My name is Heather Smith. I am a resident in Salem. I'm a teacher up in Youngstown. I was brought aware of Lifewise a little over a year ago, right before the Columbiana County Fair. I worked in the tent, found out a lot of people had never heard of Lifewise, thought it was something that's happening in Oklahoma, and so we dug in a little bit more, and I have my opinions about Lifewise, and I'm not here to tell you what to think or how to think, but I like to base my opinions on facts. And so I have people here tonight that I'm going to introduce you to that will be able to give you some more facts about Lifewise, and you can come up to your own decision if you think that's right for our schools or not. So this is not just for Salem City Schools. This can be any public school anywhere, like in a lot of the states. So what happened is they lobbied, just not a lot, I guess, just enough for one word to be changed, from may to shall. So schools shall allow for religious release time, and that could be to anybody, but right now Lifewise is pretty big, and they have grown exponentially, and we'll talk about what that growth is in terms of money, and where the money comes from to start the program, the cost for the fees that they have, things like that. So it started in Hilliard, Ohio by Joel Penton from OSU. Jim Tressel's the name of one of the rooms in there. So I'm sorry to burst your bubble if you're a huge Ohio State fan tonight, and I'm like, I'm not going to cut down on football tonight, but that's where he came from. Ohio says they shall be excused, so you have to look at different board policies are different in schools of when is excusable time in classes. So recess and lunch, okay, or a time that they could be, and even in some cases they could be during specials classes, which are a lot of fun during the day, I think, because I'm a specials teacher myself. So I think that's important. And I will say, Lifewise on the surface looks like it's a pretty package, because it's a parent choice, it's optional, it's legal, so it's like, what's wrong with it? I want my child to be a good moral person, and I'm not against that at all. It's just interesting to me that it's during school hours instead of before or after, especially when schools and their busing issues, you know. I don't know if you want to bus them, I don't know. Anyways, maybe we don't want to do that either, but anyways, I'm just saying it doesn't, during the day is just weird, because taxpayers pay for the time teachers are there, okay, and so now you're excusing time for them to leave, and there's a lot of things we're going to talk about, so I'm not going to go into that, but I'm going to tell you who my panelist is.
Hi, Jen.
Let me go through here. Okay, I would just ask for housekeeping that during this meeting that everybody's respectful, kind, and open-minded. Our presenters are going to answer questions and share some of their personal experiences. We're going to have 3 minutes to answer each question, just so we keep going and nobody goes on a 20-minute answer and you're like, I got things to do. So we're trying to summarize. They knew this beforehand. They had 3 minutes. That's the only exception is the first question because it's the big one. So I'm going to forgive her on that one, and we'll snap her at her if she needs to get going. Okay? Just get respectfully. Okay. So we have Rachel Snow. I'm going to pop the picture up here. That was me running for school board, but it's not about me. Win or lose, my goal is to inform the community tonight to make your decisions. So Rachel was actually a Lifewise volunteer, a board member, and hired as a teacher. They wanted her to falsify her hours at one time. If you Googled her name from the flyer and looked into her, you probably found some articles written about her. At one point, she was helping after a hurricane in North Carolina, and somebody asked her, hey, why isn't Lifewise is down here serving our kids during the day? You know, why are they at now? And, you know, to bring them, help them with supplies and stuff. So she can tell you a little bit more about that when she introduces her. Like, why weren't they there? What kind of serving do you do in the community, you know, when things go wrong? I have Shane Russo. He is from, like, Mahoning County. Mm-hmm. I'm not exactly sure where he lives. I know his wife teaches in Struthers.
Yeah, I live in Boardman.
And he lives in Boardman. Okay, he lives in Boardman. He is the lead organizer of action. And when I first asked him to come on board, he was not. So this all happened just recently, and he's like gonna do great things there. But he knows this theological curriculum, and I wanted to get a hold of him so he could explain to you a little bit more about what the Lifewise curriculum is. If you have questions, when they say we're non-denominational and we just teach the Bible, he's gonna dive into that a little bit more so you understand what the potential implications could be on the community from the curriculum. And then I have Zach Parrish. So, gosh, I probably noticed him a while ago because he started doing Parents Against Lifewise, which changed to the Secular Education Association. And so he knows about all sorts of things that have been happening all over. And he has experience and he has things he can tell you more so than I can. I'm just interested and I'm picking up pieces and parts. So I don't know. That's how I'm going to introduce them. And let's see if I have anything else in my notes because we're going to start on our questions. At the end of the questions, you're going to have a chance to ask questions or comments if you would like. Also, we have lots of goodies over here. So before we leave, we would like you to make sure that table doesn't need to be packed up as much. Take some cookies home to your grandchildren and your kids and yourself, spouses, and whoever can't make it, okay? So, also, Rachel and Zach, they drove 500 miles just to be here today from near the Indiana border. They didn't, I didn't even pay them. They're doing this, because they believe, it's that important. And I want to make sure they have gas money and feel appreciated. So I do have a tip jar over there for gas money. It is not for me. It's not for my campaign at all. It is for their gas money. If you feel inclined, if you appreciate what they say today, it's over there. So eat food and tip them if you would. So they feel like their time here is worthwhile. Because I'm just like, will you guys come and do this for free? 500 miles away? Sure, okay. And they're here. So I just really appreciate that. All right. The first question tonight, Rachel is going to address, and it's, what does Lifewise's internal operations tell us about the organization's real priorities? Are they truly in the best interest of our own children and the broader community they grew up in?
So there is a lot I can say about this. Obviously, I don't know someone else's mindset and what their priorities are and what their motives are. But I think we can tell by the actions of Lifewise Academy really what their top priority is. And so we have to look at that. One of the things about their internal policies that's highly concerning is the fees. So in your community, for your program to operate, depending on the size of your school, you're going to pay somewhere between $4,000 and $12,000 a year. And if you have more than one school, so for example, the community that I volunteered in, we had a building that was K through 2 and a building that was 3 through 5. We paid an additional $1,000 to do those two separate buildings. And there's not a reason for it. That cost is literally just giving you electronic access to their curriculum. That's it. You're not getting the printouts and the handouts. You're either paying to print those professionally through Lifewise, and there's pretty high fees for that. So a lot of times you're printing the PDFs yourself. The handouts that are provided to the children each week, so these little guys that talk about the character quality, those cost extra. They come in packs of 25, so you're paying for those. The t-shirts for the children, you're paying for those. If you want to set up a classroom and decorate it, you're paying for these. You get absolutely nothing except electronic access to the curriculum for that amount of money. In addition to that, if you have teachers or anything else, you have to raise additional funds. So when you see your local Lifewise Academy asking for a lot of money, that's why. That is somewhere between 15 and 50 times as much as other child evangelical programs. So, for example, other programs that are serving public school kids, one particular one that I know of that's an after-school program is $50 per 6 weeks, so $250 a year. Compare $250 a year to $13,000 a year, or $15,000 if you're in 3 buildings. So that's one thing that shows us that their number one priority, based on their actions and based on their internal policies, is money. The next page shows something else. Despite the legal risk that it causes them, they have done a couple of things. Actually, there's a lot more than this, but these are the 2 most blatant things that I feel like I can at least point out. And the first one is on line 3. Let's have some class participation. Who has seen in the news anywhere in any state that Lifewise does any lobbying to change the legislation in your state, to change the words from may to shall? Yeah. It's been in the news a lot. They've been in Texas, they've been in Oklahoma, they've been in Kentucky. They've been all over the country lobbying, and Zach will go more into that, I believe, later. So if you look at line number 3 on their IRS 990s, this is available on ProPublica Nonprofit Explorer for any nonprofit. They have to show their taxes. The question is, did the organization engage in direct or indirect political campaign activities on behalf of or in opposition to candidates or for public office? And the question and the answer is, oh wait, I'm sorry, number 4 is I did the wrong one. Did the organization engage in lobbying activities or have a Section 501H election in effect during the year? And the answer is no, that they did not engage in any lobbying. And we've all seen them in the news engaging in lobbying. And if they answer yes here, that triggers Schedule C Part 2, which either means you have to pay taxes on those activities, or you could potentially, depending on how you answer Schedule C Part 2, lose your 501c3 status. And the 501c3 status is how they get their donations or their revenue, correct? Because lots of people are donating to get that tax write-off. So, and then the second part that's real obvious is in Section 9, and it is 11D, lobbying shows no expenses. It's not free to travel. There's Joel has his tour bus, so of course he's got fuel expenses to go all over the country. People are eating out, but we can go to the next screen. Let's just ignore all the traveling expenses. We also have Schumacher and Associates is a lobbying firm. You have to disclose who, if you are a lobbying firm, you have to disclose who you're getting payments from. And Lifewise Academy did pay Schumacher and Associates in 2024. They did pay them $105,000. The first $15,000 of which would have been during that tax year that I just showed you, where they said they had no lobbying expenses. So you can take from that what you will, as far as, you know, we're either evading taxes or retaining our 501c3 status to increase revenue. Either of those things, you're at a pretty serious legal risk when you are not honest on your IRS 990s. So take that for what you will, but to me that shows that money is a pretty big priority. And then the last part is, are they truly in the best interest of children? Something that Zach's going to go over later is the FBI BCI background check and lack thereof. And so I'll let him go into the details about that. But when I went to mediation with Lifewise, which I really thought about and prayed about and did not want to do, because they had the opportunity before they terminated me for not being willing to falsify my time card for them, and they didn't want to meet with me or my attorney. But when it was going to pause their investigation, they wanted to meet for mediation. So I really was tempted not to go, but I did go. And one of the things that I asked them to do, because I didn't care about them making me whole financially for what they did to me as much as I care about future victims. And so I asked them, number one priority was, please rewrite these greedy financial sections in your policy manual, which 312, 401, 403, 408, 409, 202. I showed you one before, which was the launch fees. 202 is the background check and screening, and I asked them to please rewrite it. This was the first thing that I asked them to do, and I said, I don't want to talk about money. I just want you to rewrite your financial policies. And there was absolutely no budging on any of them. There was no discussion once they saw that this was my first request. And what does that tell you? Are children a priority if you're not willing to spend $60 on your volunteers and employees to make sure they're safe? Because that's about what it costs to background check, to do FBI and BCI background checks. So there's one other way that I want to make sure I mention, because I am a believer and I am a Christian. I am not opposed necessarily to release time religious instruction when it's done according to the law and when it's done in a way that glorifies the Lord. But they have taken out scripture that is extremely important. So if you're a Christian in this audience and you believe, and even if you're an atheist, Penn Jillette, famous Penn and Teller comedian, said, I have no respect for Christians who don't proselytize. If you believe that there is one way to heaven, then why aren't you telling people? How much, his quote was, how much do you have to hate people not to proselytize? So to not fully explain something to children, to me, is unacceptable. If you're going to be there to tell people the gospel and to take donations saying you're spreading the gospel, then you better tell the whole thing. Because otherwise, Lifewise is hiring employees and hiring volunteers to be like a lifeguard, and instead of actually helping children, you're like waving at them and being like, hey, you're drowning, but I'm just going to hang on to the life preserver. So that is my biggest problem. If they really care about children, then they should tell all of the gospel and not just the parts of it that they want to tell.
All right, so next we have Zach. He's going to talk about how his religious time instruction law requires voluntary participation, off-campus instruction, and private funding. How does the district ensure there is no use of public resources or staff time for Lifewise?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, this is going to come down to the board policies and the administration, running the actual school buildings, the principals in the elementary school. They're really going to be the ones in charge of whether or not this happens. Unfortunately, what we see most of the time, click me over, I'll play a video here. This is from the Worthington School Board meeting. Do we have audio?
No, I don't know if we do have audio. I don't think we checked for...
Okay.
It is not playing audio.
Okay, well, I can summarize it.
Alright.
This is from the Worthington School Board meeting where the school board was discussing whether or not they were going to adopt a policy before the state mandated them to. And she went and talked to different teachers in the buildings and their different concerns that they had. And one of the main concerns is how much administration time is used checking these students in and out. You have to understand when these release time laws were upheld by the Supreme Court, this was in the 1950s. We weren't checking students in and out the same way that we are now. We didn't have the security protocols in the schools that we do now, right? Mm-hmm. So we have lines of students waiting to get checked in and checked out. A lot of the schools that are participating in Lifewise, they're looking at 80%, 90% of the student body that's going. If you have that many kids lined up in the office, signing in and out, it really holds up the administration, right? And go ahead to the next slide. Some of the other things that we see a lot are, this is Elmwood. It's one of the more egregious ones here. They actually rented the school building to Lifewise. They gave Wi-Fi access to Lifewise. They hooked them up with their own phone line. And it was actually a school phone number with their own extension to the building, right? To the classroom. We see aides getting sent. That's another big issue that we have. We see the school aides, who again are being paid for with your tax dollars, they're being sent to Lifewise as well.
All right. How does the school ensure that non-participating students are not stigmatized or academically disadvantaged when peers leave for Lifewise?
Yeah, so I'm going to take this one too. Oh, can we go back one?
Well, that's it. Do you have?
Yeah, there was more.
Or is it linked here?
Oops. Sorry. Oh, that's why my animations are going to work then. Okay. All right. So, one of the big problems that we see is that teachers aren't allowed to teach during the time that the kids are gone, because again, in schools where you have 80% of the student body leaving, the teachers can't go on with their curriculum and their lesson plans. So that's a real problem that we see. You know, teachers are directly being told that they can't teach. We had a testimony here, but it's not playing. Something else that happened, and this is kind of what got me started on this fight personally, was my daughter was sent to a study hall in 2nd grade. And you can see here what it says when I ask, why is my daughter being sent to a study hall while all the other kids are going to Lifewise? What's she going to be doing in that study hall? And it says during study hall, your child will be working on academic activities independently. There was no instruction. She was not getting help. She was reading by herself and being stuck on the computer to do problems. This actually took place in the gym. It wasn't even in a classroom. They shoved my daughter in 2nd grade into a gym to sit and read by herself while all the other kids went to Lifewise. So that's what got me fired up, and that's what got me started on this.
Yeah, and to add to that, part of my background is I have a degree in special education and elementary ed. My wife is a public school teacher, and one of the things I know happens throughout the week, not even involving religious instruction, is that students get pulled from their quote unquote specials classes, so art, music, gym, any class that's not the core 4, they can get pulled out all the time for extra study for those core classes for any number of reasons. My wife, on an average week, has kids pulled out at least one day a week from her band, like her 5th grade band class, and so that impacts when you pull kids out, right? And that's for the core 4. Now we're in a position where she might have to release kids another day a week, and we're talking now going from 5 days of instruction to 3. And if you've ever tried to wrangle 5th graders in band, you know that 5 ain't enough. 3 isn't. So the point being that kids are already, education is disrupted when we devalue anything but the core 4, and all this does is continue to devalue that to the point where it becomes a question of why do we have these non-core classes anyway? Why don't we just have the core 4 and then just send them out to do whatever they want the rest of the day? Because that's what we're getting to with that, and it just reiterates the point that when kids are pulled from these classes for anything, it disrupts the instruction of everybody in the class. And if you're a teacher, you know this. If you have a student in a class who has been disrupted, you know this. But I don't think everybody is fully appreciates how much these kinds of things impact the whole education. And since we're talking about the public school, it doesn't really matter what you believe about the religious aspect of this. We're talking about the educational aspect of this, and the educational aspect of this is that it does impact the whole student body, even those who don't participate. They're forced into some sort of participation because they lose out on that instruction.
And that's always the biggest argument, is that, well, just don't sign your kid up and it won't affect them. Clearly that's not the case. My kid was affected. They never had study hall in 2nd grade before Lifewise came into her school, because that's absurd. You don't leave a 2nd grader to read by themselves.
Given Lifewise lobbied for Ohio law, how can the community be confident this isn't a backdoor to integrate evangelical teaching into the school day?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. I don't think that there's any way around this question. It absolutely is just a way to evangelicalize during the school day. They are using the schools to, proselytize to these children. Their vision statement, in fact, it used to read, they recently changed it, but it did read, their mission was to reach unchurched students in public schools. Their mission field is unchurched students in public schools. That tells you all you need to know. They're not offering this program for kids that already have this faith. They're offering this program to convert children who don't already go to church, and that's a big problem. That's something the Supreme Court warned about when they, decided these cases in the 50s. This wasn't supposed to be happening. You're not supposed to use the machinery of school and the compulsory attendance to evangelicalize and to proselytize and to convert these kids. Like I said, they did recently change that in their vision statement, probably because it was such a point of contention, right? And again, I think Rachel mentioned earlier, they're lobbying all over the country here. We put this map together here of what the different state laws say. The red is the states where it says school shall. have these programs. The blue states say they may, and then the gray states are no law. But as you can see, they are all over the country lobbying and trying to change these laws, so the schools have to work with them.
Can I just add a little piece to that? As a pastor, I used to try to work with students, in schools all the time, but not during the school day. It would be like, example, the last thing I was a part of was I went and helped with the Tabletop Gaming Society at Niles High School. And it was an after-school thing that happened. And one of the things I had to agree to in order to be allowed in that building was specifically not to try to get those kids to come to my church, not to try to proselytize those kids. And for me, I was okay with that because the goal wasn't to get the kids to come to my church. The goal was to do some good, help some of these kids. I had some great conversations with kids who were struggling at home, things like that. But I, as a pastor, I had to and we're talking, I wasn't getting anything out of this. I wasn't trying to get anything out of this for my church. I had to make that deal. But apparently, if you're paying for the system, right, and you're making money off the kids, you don't have to follow that kind of logic.
All right, he's going to answer the next one here. Who outside of Lifewise, such as independent educators, child development experts, and community representatives, has reviewed the curriculum for accuracy, inclusivity, and age appropriateness? And what Bible curriculum do they use?
Yeah, so the first part of that is no one. No one, that's the easy answer. No one has done any studies or has really looked at this in depth from an outside perspective. The only group that has been sort of commissioned to have anything to say about the curriculum was paid for by Lifewise, right? So if you know anything about how research and studies work, those are called, those are bad faith, right? When the pharmaceutical companies pay for the studies that tell you what the drug does, you don't trust those as much as if an outside source said, this is what we saw, because they have a vested interest. Lifewise has a vested interest to make sure that that study says what they want it to say. Nobody else has done anything like that. There are no certified teachers, child development experts, or curriculum specialists that have looked at this and signed off and said this is good education. Curriculum oversight only comes from Lifewise, and that is definitely not neutral in terms of the educational stuff. And again, if we were just talking about a Bible study after school, I wouldn't care. I would not care. The curriculum itself is based off of something called the Gospel Project. Now, the Gospel Project is a curriculum that was developed by Lifeway Resources, and Lifeway Resources, you may or may not know, is the publishing arm for the Southern Baptist Convention, right? Which, in and of itself, is not a problem if you are Southern Baptist or you hold. I mean, I'm not going to argue the belief of people's right to be Southern Baptist. What I will say is this: it is a curriculum created for a church setting for teaching Christians how to be Southern Baptists, right? And it is very disingenuous for a group like Lifewise to say it's interdenominational or non-denominational when it is given by an organization that would not stamp its name on it and sell it to people if it didn't adhere to its doctrinal positions. Right? There's no way the Southern Baptist Convention would stamp their name on something that did not adhere to their particular beliefs. So to make any kind of claim that this is non-denominational is just a lie. It's absurd. And it's pretty upsetting, like, to me, as I'm sitting here. I'm sitting here really trying to be cool about this, but it's as a Christian, I find Christians who lie about where their faith comes from to be abhorrent. Own your stuff. Own it. It's okay. The reason why they don't want to own it, though, is because they know that if they said, we're teaching this curriculum that teaches Southern Baptist theology, there are a whole lot of mainline Protestants, there are a whole lot of Catholics, there are a whole lot of other Christians in their communities that would say absolutely not. We don't want that flavor of Christianity or whatever. Also, very importantly about the curriculum, it's not approved by any school board or licensed organization for education. And you can make the argument, well, they're doing it off campus, it's by volunteer. But again, we're talking about taxpayer time for the block of time of the public school day. The taxes pay for the public school day, not just the individual teachers or the classes. We're paying for that block of time. And so to have kids have the weight of the school day behind their religious education, because that's what happens. What did you learn in school today? Well, I learned that the universe is this many years old, and I also learned that it was created in 6 literal days. You learned that at school? I learned it. For a second, third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader, they don't differentiate the fact that this was off campus, paid for by private funds, or their school teacher. It was at school.
And
Right, and
there's
so-
studies to back that up too. Like, he's not just saying that. There have been studies that say these younger kids cannot differentiate from these release time programs and the school day. That's fine. And there is no oversight, none. There is no oversight by the state, by the local school boards or school authorities during that time. Again, that your tax dollars have paid for. And I think it's also important to know, this is also part of my personal story, a reason that this curriculum hasn't been reviewed is because up until recently they wouldn't show it to anybody. I actually ended up publishing it online so that parents could read it, because if you're signing your child up for this, you should know what's being taught to them. But until I did that, they would not share their curriculum with parents, with school board members, with clergy members. They wouldn't let anybody review the curriculum until I published it, and they ended up suing me, and we settled, and part of my settlement was that they had to make it publicly available for people to review. So now you can, thankfully, but they really fought hard against that. So.
And they still have put a lot of
Kudos to you.
restrictions
They
on
have.
that.
They have.
Kudos to you.
Thank
I'd like to add one thing to something that you said about them lying and saying that it's non-denominational. This is another example of their motives, because if they say it's non-denominational, they're going to be able to exploit volunteers from all the churches in town, and they're going to get cash donations from all the churches in town. So that is a motive, in my opinion, for that particular lie.
All right, Zach, can you provide independent third-party evaluations not produced by Lifewise that confirm the program's benefits to all public school students?
No, in fact, it's quite the opposite, because they do have a study that they put out that they claim is an independent study. It was actually paid for by one of their biggest investors, Ambassador Enterprises, and they claim things like their curriculum improves attendance, it lowers discipline rates, it increases academic performance, it lowers truancy, tardiness. I don't know how you can say you are lowering, or fixing attendance when you're pulling kids out of school. We actually had a researcher from the University of Nebraska, a professor out there, go ahead and look at this study, because I wasn't qualified enough to debunk it, but he was. And if you scan the QR code, you can see his debunking of their study and how bad the data that they used is. Just the analysis and the data that they used for this study, it's BS. There's no other way to put it except to say that it's just pure BS. So.
Is that in the pamphlet?
It is not.
This is not, but
Okay,
I
hold
can,
the screen for a minute then,
we'll
please.
hold it for a second if you want to, anybody wants to
It is
scan
on our
it.
website too. But.
It's on the website too.
Okay, thank you.
So. All right, Shane, the curriculum teaches one denominational reading of Christianity as absolute truth. How does that serve the religiously diverse student population of Salem's public schools?
Again, short version, it doesn't. But again, it's published by Southern Baptist Convention. It is a Lifewise rebrand, but they don't change anything from the theological core, which that makes sense, because again, the SBC would not, Lifeway would not license this out to them if they did that. A little bit about the doctrinal framing of it. Again, you may hold these things to be true, and so I'm not here to say don't believe these things. All right, I hope this means something. That I'm not anti-Christian. I'm not anti-even Southern Baptist Convention. I have my own theological beliefs, but every lesson they teach from a very specific view of evangelicalism that points to everything points to Jesus. And you may believe that, and that's fine, but a good portion of our students do not. And what happens when you do that in church is that you teach them your theological backing. What happens when you teach them church in a public school setting is they get to go back into the building and be all confused about the things they are also learning in school that might not say Jesus is the answer, right? And I'm talking about the scientific framing of this theology is generally seven-day creationist, which, again, you can hold that belief, but we cannot teach that in our public schools because that is not the only truth out there, right? If we're teaching to everyone, then we need to teach the thing that is does the most good for the most people. And teaching one theological framework doesn't do that. Again, also this theology, not the theology, the curriculum is designed to evangelize. It is designed to, here are the guardrails that you must adhere to get to heaven. Here are the guardrails you must adhere to in order to be a right believer. It's not inviting critical thinking. And again, if there's one thing the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, has not been a hallmark of, it's critical thinking and allowing folks to question without getting absolutely smacked down. We see this every time a Southern Baptist Convention woman decides to stand up and start talking. Every time a Southern Baptist woman gets up and starts talking, you have all the Southern Baptist men tell her, you're not allowed to do that. That does not sound like critical thinking to me. That doesn't sound like an inclusive mindset. We're not even talking about any of the, when we use inclusive, we usually are talking about like sexuality and things like that. We're not even talking about that. I'm talking about like basic gender norms, right? Between like whether or not women have any kind of authority to speak to people, right? This is the kind of theology that this curriculum is teaching. And that is not appropriate for our public school kids. And it's definitely not appropriate for taxpayer-funded time. And I won't even get that started on the fact that, when they specifically talk about queer identities, LGBTQ stuff in a very negative light, and they paint any non-traditional family, so mom, dad, 2.5 kids, and a dog, right? Anything that's not that as sinful or outside of God's design. Even though the Old Testament has like dozens of different family units, but apparently you can only use the Old Testament for Leviticus and Deuteronomy, but when it comes to family formations, we didn't read that part. So, please move on.
It's similar. It determines which theological interpretations are taught, and how is that decision inclusive of diverse Christian traditions, let alone other faiths?
Yeah, right. So Lifeway Christian resources are the determiner of what is in the Gospel Project, not Lifewise. It was created by evangelical editors, all of a Calvinistic bent. And if none of that made sense to you, the short version of that is Calvinism is one of the two big ways that Christians kind of conceptualize the world in the West. The other is Arminianism. The basic thing here is that Calvinists, and why it's important here, is that they believe in a thing called total depravity. And that means the starting point for them is that humans are bad. Humans are bad. We were born bad. We didn't have a choice but to be bad. And some of us, no matter how good we try to be, are going to hell anyway. That's Calvinistic thought. That is Southern Baptist teaching, right? That is the group that put together this curriculum.
Does that mean heaven is empty?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, we could go on and on and on about the flaws in that. I personally don't hold to that, but there are a bunch of faithful Christians in the world that start from that point of view.
As a Presbyterian pastor, I take umbrage with that comment.
Okay.
A Presbyterian pastor, 42 years.
And that's fine.
Yeah, okay.
I am definitely oversimplifying down what is a much deeper theological issue. But tell me which part of what I just said was wrong.
The whole thing about total depravity, I think just that comment takes Calvinism out of complete context.
You're telling me that Calvinists don't believe in total depravity.
I think it's part of a conversation.
You are a much more progressive Calvinist than 99% of Calvinists.
Not the Calvinists I know, or not the Presbyterians I know. So this is not.
And I'm not, and the Presbyterian Church did have, the Presbyterian Church also did have their own splits, like most of the other mainline.
Lots of them. We've
Yeah,
also
and
had a lot of
I think it's
reunification.
right, and I think it's because people like you recognize that it's not as bleak as others. So I will absolutely I will admit that it isn't as dark as all that. I will say that the Southern Baptists hold to what I just said.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
well-
I take umbrage with the Southern Baptists because
Okay.
they don't form
And yes, so
I got
not
nothing good to say
okay.
about
So I will say not all Calvinists, right? I will say that I see that point.
I can jump in here and say that Lifewise does, though. You can
Oh,
see.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Even
Oh, yeah,
though
absolutely,
they say
yes.
this is character education,
Yeah.
what it specifically says in some of their documentation that good. You cannot get to heaven through good works. Man is inherently doomed. Like that is specifically written in their own documentation. So whether or not Presbyterians believe it or Calvinists believe it, Lifewise does, and that's what they're teaching these kids. So.
Yeah. Yes, it is not my. It is. I do apologize. It is not my goal here to crap on Calvinism. In fact, that's not in my notes. I went off script here. So I do apologize very, very much because, like I said, there are a lot of faithful, devout Christians who start from a Calvinistic point of view, and it's that in and of itself isn't the problem, right? It's what some Christians have done from that starting point to get to other places. I think that for public education, though, the issue here is that we have Catholics, Orthodox, mainline Protestants, Jewish people, Muslims, secular people, kids in our classes, and Lifewise paints them all as sinners doomed to hell, right? And that is what is taught. Maybe not as overtly, not in the younger ages, that's for sure. In the older ages, that is absolutely taught that way. But they're not going. They'll use prettier language. But in the end, kids come back to school to their best friend who doesn't go to church and thinks my best friend is going to hell. How do I change that? And that's not a flaw. That's a feature in their programming. If they get that from their church and they come back, they still got to get them to come to church. But if they get that from Lifewise and want them to go to Lifewise, all they got to do is say, "You want to miss class?" Right? And so I think that's a problem.
And they make classes really fun too. I mean, that's the other part of this that I don't know if you necessarily get into here, but I mean, they do pizza parties and they give out candy and
I'd
that
go
type
for a
of thing.
pizza party.
Absolutely. Who doesn't want to skip gym class and go have some pizza? If you go back to the last slide real quick, I just wanted to point out, I think this conversation about doctrine and different beliefs is really an important one. I was raised LDS. I was raised Mormon.
Really?
Yeah, and the thing with the Lifewise teachings is it's biblical literalism, right? Even as a Mormon, we were taught, take the creationism. It says 7 days in the Bible, but that's kind of a parable, right? We know evolution is still real. God's time isn't our time. That's what we were taught as Mormons when I was a kid. And you can see here, we have different letters from different churches in the communities here, Catholic churches, Jewish churches. A lot of different churches have spoken out and said this isn't our doctrine, it's not what we believe. So
this next question is for you: is how do you safeguard against promoting an us versus them mentality when students are told that the world will hate you for your faith?
yeah, and this is something that we see so much. Like he said, they're coming back from these Lifewise classes and telling their friends that you are going to hell. We see this time and time again. We have so many reports of kids just coming home in tears, not understanding why they can't go because their family's Jewish. You shouldn't have to explain that to a second grader, right? We have reports of people saying, "I can't be your friend anymore because you look like a lesbian. Just you look like a lesbian. I can't be your friend anymore." You click through here, and the thing is, they say they don't teach this divisiveness. They say they don't teach this bullying. If you can see up here, this is a post from Lifewise and Continental. They're actually, promoting. This is what we learned in Lifewise today. And what you can see is a student who drew this one individual with small muscles and it says, ooh, God bad, versus this individual with big muscles who says, yeah, God's real, yeah. This is meme culture. This is a child trying to, their take on a Chad meme, if anybody knows what that is. But I mean, this is truly saying the non-believer is gross and weak versus the believer who is strong and awesome. And they're promoting it as this is what we learned in Lifewise today. So when they turn around and say, well, we don't teach this, well, it sure looks like you do to me, And yeah, there's just one example of the testimonies that we've got. We have dozens and dozens of these testimonies that we've collected over the years.
All right, Shane, if all correct answers align with one tradition's theology, how is this education rather than indoctrination?
Yeah, I mean, it is indoctrination, and again, our churches by default are indoctrinal organizations, entities, and they should be, right? That's the point. So my issue isn't necessarily with the fact that we want to teach them doctrine from our theological point of view. The issue is that this group wants to do this on the public dime, and so it's not. We should be educating. And I know somebody is going, not maybe here, but somebody, and I have heard the argument, well, public schools are indoctrinating our students with a secular worldview. And the reality is that it's a public school. Of course they are going to teach things that the public should know, that the public should grab onto. So if you want to call that indoctrinating into a public worldview, I guess you can, and that is what that's such a weird way to frame it, but that's what some Christians have argued, is that we are just trying to counterbalance. But we already have that time and the ability to counterbalance literally all the other hours outside of that day. I'm not sure we are going to actually address the question directly, so I'll say it now. The reason why Lifewise does this during the school day is they know darn well the kids are going to sign up in droves to leave class, rather than if they did it after school or did it as a Sunday school where they would get nothing. Because we've taken what should be a church issue and we've tried to make it a public school issue. And that's all fine and well until the law changes to say that your kids absolutely have to learn Lifewise curriculum. Right now, it says that schools have to let Lifewise teach their curriculum at a certain point. But it took some lobbying to get there. Do you really think it'll stop with that? No, it won't, because evangelicalism doesn't stop with that. The evangelical worldview is we have to save the world. And so it's not going to stop here.
And we can see that in what they're lobbying too. That's the other part.
We will have time for questions at the end, sir.
The other part of what he was saying about it's not going to stop here, like we said in Ohio, they changed one word from may to shall, but we track the legislation that they're lobbying for in other states. And I want to make sure it's clear, they're not just lobbying for this legislation, they actually wrote it along with First Liberty, the Heritage Foundation, the Wall Builders. They cite these organizations as helping them write this legislation that they are pushing forward. And it's specifically saying that they want to be allowed into the school buildings now. So that's the next thing that's going to happen. They're going to be using school classrooms during the day to teach their classes.
As far as public education goes, it should be the goal. And I will hold the public education system to the fire when it isn't this way. But it should be the goal for our public education system to teach thinking, critical thinking, or any thinking for that matter. And you can argue whether or not they're accomplishing that goal across the board. I think there are levels to that, right? We know that that's true. But when one answer is the only answer, and anything that deviates from that answer is wrong or bad or sinful, then that is not public education appropriate. That's not public school time appropriate. It is not, and this isn't just a religious issue. We see this in other areas too. Heather can speak directly to this. You've been doing a lot of work with learning about Salem's history, right? But if we only teach one aspect of our history, then we're getting an incomplete view, and we can't critically think and make critical decisions based on the reality of the totality because we've only learned one scope of it. But so it should be the goal of the public education system to say, this is all of it, now do with that what you will. this definitely doesn't meet that bill by a long shot.
All right, Rachel. Let's learn about some money. How is it funded?
So, according to Lifewise Academy, it is private donations. And the next slide shows a researcher. Oh, go back. Yep. It shows Lifewise.exposed. There's someone that's researched and uncovered where 19 million of the 60 million in donations that they've had the last several years have came from. Obviously, some things are given in a way that's harder to track. Is it EFTs? Is that what they're called?
DAFs,
DAFs,
donor
that's
advised
what it is.
funds.
Yeah, and donor advised funds, so it's a big giant chunk of money that comes from multiple sources, and we can't see what those sources are. So there's a lot that's given from those. But this list that is on this website, if you go to lifewise.exposed, you can see a list of a lot of different donors. And one thing I found really interesting, depending on what community you're from, you'll see different businesses, and you'll just be surprised. I think it's even searchable by state too, so that's helpful. But one thing I found really interesting on this list, in my prior life, I was a banker and bank manager for quite a while, and so it was really interesting to me to see the financial institutions that are on here. Something we'll talk about a little bit later is their investment income. But one thing that I know from being a bank manager for a number of years, business bankers and investment bankers, they like to kind of, scratch your back or scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. They do some like reciprocal business. So I think that may have something to do with all the financial institutions that are on here. It just was really curious to me when I saw that, because typically when kids come in with like asking us to donate to their soccer club and things like that, when you're in banking, it's a no-go. I mean, banks tend to be pretty stingy with their money, so I was fascinated by how many banks were on that list. The next page is about the fact that RTRI legislation states no public funds can be used to fund the Lifewise programs. However, there's several resources. I think I listed them all up there. I'm gonna stand up just so I can see my own slide. That you can go to that will regularly post information. I've got Secular Education Association, obviously, Zach's organization. Respect Public Schools also catches a lot of stuff. Honesty for Ohio Education, and then Lifewise.exposed. Those are all some really good things you can follow, whether you follow on Facebook or go to websites. That you can get a lot of information, but this is one, it's a lease agreement with the Village of Dresden. So that is a public entity, and the lease agreement shows that Lifewise is paying $0 in rent and paying $0 in utilities. So they are being publicly funded in the Village of Dresden. On the left of the screen, I also have, this was posted by Respect Public Schools, a bus that was donated by the Muskingum Authority of Public Transit. That's obviously public funding. They gave a whole bus to Lifewise Academy, and Lifewise happily accepted it and took their picture with it. And then on the right, Zach mentioned Elmwood was on campus. That is a way that you will never see another picture of me again. I am wearing a Lifewise shirt in that picture. And that is Mrs. X Music Classroom. That program was on campus as well. That program doesn't exist any longer. And then I've also become aware that Newton, Ohio also has done, I'm not sure if they're currently on campus or not, but there's several times that we're blurring that line of public funding.
Intentionally so.
Yes.
Don't think that they don't know the laws either, or, they're doing it to normalize it.
Right, now we have a good question. They've all been good questions, but this one's a different. What kind of background checks does Lifewise require of volunteers, and what is the hiring process for teachers? So this was for Zach and Rachel.
Yeah, I'll start with the background check question. I actually ran a background check on myself through their service. It was called Protect by Ministries. It's really important to know, a lot of people aren't going to understand this until you do the research and look at it, when you use these private companies to run these background checks, it is not the same thing as the FBI and the state databases. These private companies, they buy data from counties or from states, right? So they're not nearly as complete as what you're going to get in the centralized database that the state and the FBI is using, right? The other big difference here in Ohio specifically is that any teachers and volunteers in the school have to enter into what's called a rack-back system, which will automatically red flag if a teacher or a volunteer, say, gets a DUI or any kind of charge like that. It throws a red flag up into the system so that school administrators can know, district board members can know, hey, something's going on here, you might want to check into this, right? Lifewise doesn't have to do any of that. They don't have fingerprinting. They do these, what are basically consumer reports, right? They're these private background checks, and they're just not equivalent to what teachers do. You know, that is the key takeaway here, is they're not equivalent, they're not the same thing. Like I said, I actually ran one on myself. I've got a bit of a record. It brought back less of my criminal history when I did it for Lifewise than Lowe's did when I applied for a job there. And there's been, this is from Indiana, sorry, the slides are messed up here. There was a big contention here in the school district in Indiana because while Lifewise was trying to get up and running, they said, we'll share this information with you, you know, and the school board said, yes, you either have to share this information with us or your volunteers and teachers need to come to the school and do our background checks. And while they were talking it out, trying to get their program running, they said, yeah, we'll do that, yeah, we'll do that. When the time came to get the program off the ground, they refused to. It says here, after nearly 6 weeks of waiting, Lifewise informed the school board they would not share the background check results with the volunteers, nor would they require their volunteers to participate in their background check process, and are under no legal obligation to cooperate with the request. In Ohio, that is not true. That was one of the big wins that we got. We couldn't stop the mandate. We really tried. I went down and testified in Columbus personally. Our organization, we put a huge call to action out. There was a lot of us that went down and testified against this. There was actually more testimony against this than there was for it if you just look at the sheer numbers of it. Legislators didn't care, they're in the pockets. But what we did get added into the legislation was that school districts can dictate the background check policies of Lifewise. So it's really important to know if they're coming to your district. You know, districts can put guidelines and restrictions on the background check specifically here in Ohio. We talk about the hiring process and qualifications.
Okay. Yes. So I can mainly speak to my experience, which is a little different because I volunteered for a little while beforehand. I was a volunteer for about, I want to say like 14 months or so when I applied to be a teacher. And I was volunteering in a different program than the one I applied in. So the first step if you want to be a teacher is to obtain a letter of recommendation from your church pastor. Then you fill out your job application with your job history and your educational background. And there is not a post-secondary education requirement. I didn't realize this at that time because I have one. So I have a bachelor's degree, so I didn't realize that wasn't required, but it's not. There's also not any requirement for experience in an educational public school classroom, which I also didn't realize because I have that as well. So, but about 6 months after me, our secondary teacher was hired, and she has had no degree and no educational classroom experience, just a Sunday school teacher and church camp counselor. So from an educational standpoint, since this is during the school time, I feel like that's kind of disappointing. And then you have to answer essay questions. There's 3 questions about your spiritual life, 5 about doctrine and philosophy of ministry, and I believe I highlighted them in white. There's 3 questions that refer to an educational classroom and how to, like, your classroom management. And I felt like that was kind of telling that it's just not really that important. So then you take your application, you submit it, and after you submit all your essay questions and your application, I was reached out to a couple weeks later by 2 of the Lifewise programs that were in my community that were just starting up, and they were at different points. So in one, I was contacted by the lead teacher, and that was in the National Trail program. and she contacted me for an interview. And then in the Tri-County North program, I was contacted by the director because they were further behind in the startup, and they had no lead teacher. So at Tri-County North, I was interviewing for a lead teacher, and at National Trail, I was interviewing for a classroom teacher. And the reason I was interviewing for both is because they were supposed to be on different days of the week. So I got an interview maybe within a week, and I sat down with all of the board members and the director in both programs, and it was a discussion. They all asked a lot of questions, and within about a week of that, both programs sent me an offer. They called verbally to discuss it first, and then sent a written offer once I accepted. One, I accepted a substitute position, and the other was the lead teacher position.
I think another thing to add here, they also make all their teachers and volunteers sign and agree to their statement of faith. I used to give some grace to the teachers and say, maybe they're getting duped, maybe they don't understand. And I think when you were hired, I don't know that they had that requirement, did they? Did you have to sign and agree to that?
I didn't agree to some of the things that are in it now,
Yeah.
like the weird questions about, people that are divorced and all
Yeah,
that.
and that's part of what's in it. I actually had a friend who used to volunteer for them as well, and he was a bisexual, and when he went to re-volunteer, they said you have to sign this document which says we believe marriage is between a man and a woman. We believe that gender is male, female, and can't be changed. It's a gift from God. And he said, I don't feel comfortable signing this. I don't believe this. And they would no longer let him volunteer for them. So, it's not just that they have these beliefs, they're teaching these beliefs. You have to also have these beliefs to work for them and sign and agree that you do.
So Shane, how is Lifewise using RTRI to hurt schools?
I want to first say, I want to be clear that I don't think that Lifewise believes what they're doing is harmful, right? I believe that they truly believe that what they're doing is a good thing, right? They want to, I do believe that evangelical Christians want to do the best for people. They believe that they are saving people from eternal damnation, right? So I don't think that they think they're hurting the public schools, though I will make the argument that there are some in Lifewise that do not want public education, right? But as an organization, Lifewise absolutely needs public education. So they don't want to destroy the public education system. They don't want to hurt it beyond their ability to benefit from it, so to speak. However, the three main ways that it does hurt public education is it disrupts academic time, which I've talked before. It divides students socially, and it undermines local control. You can see here on the picture, like where it says the students will be missing part of our science or SS class in the afternoon. We only meet 3 times a week to begin with. Are we okay with having them make up the work they missed? Now the law states, or most policies state, I don't know if actually the law states it. Does it do? Okay. That kids are responsible to make up whatever work they miss. But
And if they can't be missing these core classes like science,
right,
and
like that one. So that
that's
one
the
is
other part of
basically.
it.
But like I mentioned earlier, a lot of classes are getting kids pulled out for whatever reason anyway, and now the law has made it so that schools have to allow that to happen. So it disrupts academic time, not just for the kids who are participating, but for the kids who miss art and gym and library and other specials. It impacts the whole class because, like, you can't teach a band class when a quarter of your band is missing, right? It creates unequal access to, I believe, a well-rounded public education. I said it divides students socially. The children who stay behind, we've seen numerous report after report that they feel punished or left out, and this often happens at the hands of the kids who are going, right? Because they're being taught that these kids, there's something wrong with these kids that they won't come, or there's something wrong with their families because their parents won't let them come. And a lot of districts have reported bullying for the non-participants. And ultimately, and I think this is one that probably hits close to like a lot of our hearts, regardless of where we fall on the theological or political spectrum, it absolutely undermines local control of our education, right? Yes, each local district is beholden to the state standards and the rules and things like that, but we get to decide how that plays out by and large during the day. But this law, that where it used to exist, that districts could allow for this, right? It existed that that districts could allow for release time religious instruction. This law, the change in the law makes it mandatory now, and for a community like Salem, that's a big deal because last year Salem School Board denied Lifewise ability to do this, and then the law changed, and now they don't have a choice. So the school district is now being forced to do something that, as a district, said no. We understand there are risks and problems with this, right? So it undermines local control, and districts now have lost the ability to say no to something that is harmful.
All right, Rachel. How is Lifewise using RTRI to benefit themselves?
So on the next screen, I've got a couple things I want to point out. This is their revenue, 2023 and 2024. We don't know 2025 yet, because their fiscal year ends June 30th, so that we should see that in around November. Hopefully, we'll get that information.